BBC impartiality is a famously touchy subject. The corporation is duty-bound to not pick a side on a host of issues, but to simply offer the facts and let the audience judge for themselves. Lord Reith, the first Director General of the BBC, once said its aim was to inform, educate and entertain. What it wouldn't do, however, is tell people what to think. Former Newsnight anchor Emily Maitlis has now attacked her former employer, the BBC, for failing to maintain those high standards it claims to uphold. Speaking at the MacTaggart lecture, Maitlis had this to say about how the BBC responded to complaints from Number 10 regarding her 2020 piece to camera on Dominic Cummings' alleged lockdown breaches.
We show our impartiality when we report without fear or favour, when we're not scared to hold power to account, even when it feels uncomfortable to do so, when we understand that if we've covered rule-breaking by a Scottish chief medical officer or an English government scientist, then journalistic rigour should be applied to those who make policy within Number 10. The one person, ironically, who understood this was Dominic Cummings himself, who texted me that very evening to offer his wry support. Why had the BBC immediately and publicly sought to confirm the government spokesman's opinion without any kind of due process? It makes no sense for an organisation that is admirably, famously rigorous about procedure, unless it was perhaps sending a message of reassurance directly to the government itself. Put this in the context of the BBC board, where another active agent of the Conservative Party, a former Downing Street spin doctor and former advisor to BBC rival GB News, now sits, acting as the arbiter of BBC impartiality. According to the Financial Times, he's attempted to block the appointment of journalists he considers damaging to government relations, provoking Labour's deputy leader, among others, to call it Tory cronyism at the heart of the BBC.
The response from some quarters to that speech was feverish, particularly from people who often call criticism of the BBC conspiracy theories, if it comes from people they don't agree with, particularly on the left. Emily Maitlis is finally free to say what needed saying, said one. The BBC has lost its nerve, declared Gabby Hinchcliffe for The Guardian. Thank you, Emily Maitlis. Speaking the truth in a time of universal deceit is a revolutionary act, cried James O'Brien. Revolutionary! All hail Emily Maitlis, cried former Remain campaigner Femi Olawule. The fight back begins, concluded former Conservative MP Anna Soubry. I thought she was beginning the fight back at Change UK, but there we go. It's important to add that the BBC has denied all of this. A BBC executive has told The Guardian's Jim Waterson that in no way did the government prompt the broadcaster to censure Newsnight over that particular incident. Now, I agree with Maitlis that the BBC has repeatedly failed on impartiality. We talk about that a lot on this show. But what I also find interesting is the response she generated. There was no smoking gun in the speech. This was her opinion about her work had been singled out for a political mauling by Number 10. That wasn't new, but how BBC management immediately deferred to it, well, that was, she says. Maitlis says at the top of the speech that what is to follow is not a post-BBC ex-employee rant. And yet, it kind of is. In any case, the response she generated is fantastic. She's finally found her voice. It's amazing. This is finally being called out. It surprised me. Maybe it shouldn't, but it did. Because what's changed? I'll tell you what. Emily Maitlis no longer earns £350,000 a year at the BBC. Everything Maitlis said in that speech has been public knowledge for years, and Robbie Gibb, who she insinuates is a quote-unquote Tory agent, was head of the BBC's political programme in 2017, before going to work for Prime Minister Theresa May. He had been for years. Was this never an issue before? Or is she now calling into question the entirety of the BBC's political output under Robbie Gibb? Because that's the only coherent conclusion here. I would agree if it is, by the way, but I suspect it isn't. I quickly want to go over some of the BBC's content under Maitlis, which presumably was firmly impartial. Here's Maitlis tweeting about whether Labour should remove then leader Jeremy Corbyn immediately before an election. Here she is presenting Newsnight with Jeremy Corbyn in front of the Kremlin with a rather strange-looking hat. Here she is retweeting someone referring to the Corbyn cult, which presumably means the 500,000 Labour members who aren't really legitimate in public life. And finally, here is a clip of Jeremy Corbyn as a CGI Voldemort, which Maitlis introduced as former Labour leader. Well, that was the end of a show. That was how they finished. It was a bit of fun making him look so evil. Harriet, is this a case of Maitlis perhaps not being the best messenger for what is, nevertheless, a very important message?
Maitlis is a hypocrite with a posh voice. There's no two ways about it. She's a hypocrite. I don't tend to think of journalists as the most, revolutionary people, especially when they're working for British Broadcasting Corporation, or that they're usually, the man or woman of the people. It really does astonish me, people's lack of self-awareness. And it made me laugh how people can suddenly switch perspective when something suddenly affects them. And yeah, of course, it's an eloquent speech. She's one of the country's most famous journalists. That is usually a prerequisite to be a journalist, is the ability to speak. And you know what? She reminds me of my pal's mother, who on the second referendum demonstration, she posted on Facebook saying, "I haven't marched for 20 years and now I'm here." And I was thinking, where have you been? We've had over 10 years worth of austerity, the Iraq war. Oh yeah, no, you just turn up for this demonstration. It just smells of a huge amount of privilege and lack of self-awareness and hypocrisy. But everyone will love it because she's, very eloquent. She's got a lovely posh voice and she's saying really obvious things. Great.
Yeah, there was one tweet which really summed this up for me. It made me chuckle too. It was by an @Dejeva, who wrote, "Emily Maitlis complaining about the lack of BBC impartiality is like the CEO of Thames Water complaining about turds in the River Thames." Sometimes Twitter gets too much for bad press. I thought that was pretty funny.